Hello, welcome to the most censored news. I'm Lee Camp. Today I'm joined by an incredible investigative journalist, Greg Palast, and we're going to get into that in 1 second. Please. Oh, sorry, I've got an echo here. uh, we're going to, in just a second, he has honestly new evidence, new as in the past few months and past year of the election shenanigans that have been going on in many ways across the country. But a lot of it is centered on Georgia, which is in the midst of a runoff election right now. Will happen in the next few days. And there's no one who knows more about this stuff. I've been following and working with Greg for years now. This is the guy who revealed exactly how Bush stole Florida in the famous Bush v. Gore battle. He's done amazing work on oil spills, amazing work on the Koch brothers, and so many others. Vulture's Picnic is a phenomenal book revealing the disaster capitalists that go in and buy up areas and destroy them for pennies on the dollar, because it's all about profit, right, folks? Anyway, take a minute, click like, click subscribe, all those things. This is a regular series now, this interview series. We have already done interviews with Scott Ritter, Chris Hedges, Stephen Donziger, and Alan McLeod, and we have more coming up. We have Ann Garrison tomorrow, another great journalist. So definitely make sure you subscribe. And let's get to it. Enough of the I don't know, spitballing. No, enough of the chit chat. So to give you a little more of Greg's career, he's known for his incredible investigative reports for The Guardian, BBC television. Palast is also the author of multiple best-selling books, but perhaps the one that did the best was The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. His new film, Vigilante, Georgia's Vote Suppression Hitman, produced by Martin Sheen, I think I've heard of him, and narrated by Rosario, is free online, but only through the Georgia Senate runoff, which is this coming up December 6th. You can watch it at vigilantemovie.com. You can get it for free there. All right, without further ado, here's Greg Palast.
Okay, no more doing.
No more doing. Thanks for joining me. I know you're getting ready to jump on another flight back to Georgia.
Yeah, lucky me.
I've seen the film. I thought, why not start with the trailer, and then we can go from there.
Okay.
So everyone can know what we're dealing with here.
So you didn't call him, but you challenged his right to vote or have his ballot challenged.
No ballot. Mr. Chairman, you have been challenged.
Is this an attempt to remove a lot of Democrats, black people from voting?
Get out of my house now.
Voter fraud.
Law enforcement is going to the houses and places of employment and making people afraid to go out and exercise their rights.
And today to come out and not be able to vote, it bothers me to my core.
My life was on the line. I could go to prison. If I just commit suicide, this will be over.
Stop voter fraud.
They raided a voter registration office and tried to send all of these college kids to jail.
Call our voter fraud hotline.
Tonight, Governor Kemp has signed that controversial election bill. He signed Senate Bill 202.
If you go back to the bill signing, you will see Governor Kemp sitting under a painting of a plantation.
Time to do something if we don't get it back in November.
Brian Kemp is preparing to ban books.
Whose vote? My vote, not his.
Are you removing black voters from the voter rolls just so you can win this election?
There we have it, vigilante. And, you know, I know that a lot of people joining us because many hopefully are fans of mine. You know, a lot of them are not into the two corporate parties, but I think a lot of them, like me, want to see every vote counted because I, you know, have long been a supporter of voting because the corporate rulers would love nothing more than for us not to vote or to have our votes stolen away. And so I'm in defense of anything that protects people's right to vote. And it was fought for years and years, which you get into brilliantly in your movie.
Well, yeah, I mean, it doesn't. I'm not. One nice thing about being a reporter in the Palast Investigative Fund, my foundation, is that we're nonpartisan. Because I'm going to tell you, if you're waiting for political parties to save your vote, forget it. You save your vote. And the only reason why they want to shoplift your vote, throw landmines in your way of voting, is because it's valuable. So you don't, someone's stealing your car, you don't throw them the keys and say, here you go. You say, stop thief. In fact, and one thing you don't do, I love the term vote suppression. If your car is stolen, you don't say, my car's been suppressed.
Right.
It's like,
I always love the garbage euphemisms for things like this. It drives me nuts.
It's like, what are they going to do? Start coming up with I won't even say it, like, cute names for lynching or something. I don't think so. Yeah. So we can't, it's hard to say things directly, which is why I have trouble getting back on the, like you mentioned, I, was with BBC television, Al Jazeera, and The Guardian. I had to basically flee the country to be able to report the news about my country. I mean, I can't get on. I mean, you're not going to see my bylines in the Washington Pravda or the New York Izvestia.
Yeah, I actually want to get into that more in a bit. Why we don't see you on those main channels, but let's dig into the movie first. Yeah. And what you reveal in it, and it is important right now because there's literally a runoff going on right now in Georgia, and actually I'll show your article. So to begin with, why did mail-in ballots in Georgia plunge by 1 million?
Yeah, well, that's why they plunged by 1 million, because they're black ballots and they had to get rid of the black voter. And so we had basically a great social experiment during COVID where we actually made it easier to vote nationwide. We were mailing out ballots. We had ballot drop boxes. People voted by mail, and we ended up with 180 million voters, a monster record for America. So the thing is, though, in Georgia, you had a Democratic sweep where Biden beat Trump in supposedly redneck red state, and two very progressive senators, Raphael Warnock, the Reverend from the Ebenezer Baptist Church, and John Ossoff, who is Jewish, and that's harder to sell than African American even in Georgia. And they all won. It was a Democratic sweep. So they said, what do we do? What happened here? Oh, black people were able to vote. Well, so they had to stop that. So they passed a law. Brian Kemp, the governor, the Republican governor, and the Georgia legislature passed a law, SB 202, 98 pages of Jim Crow. And one of the things that put Warnock, Ossoff, and Biden over the top were the 1.3 million mail-in ballots, 1.3 million. And we have the numbers. They actually broke more than 2 to 1 for the Democrats. So you had 1.3 million absentee mail-in ballots, and they were overwhelmingly Democratic. And by that, I mean from African-American voters in the Atlanta area. So they just said, okay, well, let's stop them. Let's shut the drop boxes where they're putting their ballots. And so they literally passed this law, which said that if you are accounted, that you can only have one drop box for 100,000 active voters to put in your mail-in ballot or your mailed-in ballot. And remember, in Georgia, unlike other states, you have to have it at the voting office by election day. So you can't count on the postal service. So they removed by state law the only 4 counties out of 159 in Georgia that are affected are the 4 counties that make up Atlanta or Black Atlanta, right? So this is where now the 4 counties of Atlanta are majority non-white. The other 155 counties are 65% white. In Atlanta, the number of drop boxes dropped from 107 to 25. And in outside of Atlanta, the number of boxes rose under this law. It's amazing. They literally said black areas remove the ballot boxes. White areas, you have to increase the ballot boxes. As a result, and with many other things, here's the final number that you need to know. We went from 1.3 million mail-in ballots 2 years ago. Now in this election, down to 0.2 million. In other words, even if you went to our No Child Behind Left educational program, you know that there were 1 million votes, 1 million ballots lost. They were 2-1 Democratic. And so that's why Raphael Warnock is in a runoff with Herschel Walker, Trump's candidate, because he only won by 35,000 votes. But that's after 1 million votes basically disappeared. Now, that doesn't mean they were thrown in the ocean. A lot of people waited in lines. A lot of people brought in their votes other ways. But once again, that was just one of the literally, I would say, 200 new impediments to voting put in the way of people of color.
Yeah, and this is strikingly similar to what's been done in the past. I remember in Ohio, but also other places where they would cut the number of voting machines in black areas and Hispanic areas to tiny numbers, so people waited in line for hours and hours, and they're also making it near impossible to even wait in line for the hours you have to spend there, because as you mentioned in the video, but you've covered it more in the past, that Georgia made it illegal to serve people food or water while they wait.
Yeah, it's a felony crime. So what they did is they eliminate mail-in balloting, they eliminate early voting stations, and so you end up with these lines that are 3, 4, 5 hours long. And this is Georgia. So the Georgia heat, Wednesday they'll be voting, and it's going to rain. But if you dare give someone a cup of water, a bottle of water, a slice of pizza while they're waiting in line, because I know Papa John's was handing out calzones for people waiting 5 hours. I got that. I caught these criminals on camera. The Papa John's gang, the guys with the vest, the green and red vests, right? And handing out calzones. Literally, that's a felony crime. And it's just one of the many ugly and almost ludicrous tricks, but they work well. I mean, that's how Brian Kemp got elected governor in the first place in 2018. He removed, from our analysis, I was working with Al Jazeera and Rolling Stone, that we had 340,000 voters simply removed from the voter rolls on the grounds they didn't live in Georgia. And according to the experts working with the post office and with Amazon, which, believe me, they know where you live, those people still lived at their voting addresses. They just happened to be voting while black, including, by the way, you'll see in the film, Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin. I'm filming her as she's bounced out of a polling station. I went to this polling station because a lot of people were getting bounced. She was getting bounced. They said, "Listen, old lady, you can't vote here. You don't live in Georgia anymore." And so I went to the house that she supposedly didn't live in down the street. And there was a picture of her in that house with her cousin King having dinner with her. And so obviously she's been in that house at least 50 years.
It's so revolting, and it honestly does take you back to the times of Jim Crow. I mean, this is a ongoing 100-year process, over 100 years, where black people have been fighting for their right to vote. They eventually largely got it, and now in a variety of states, maybe Georgia's leading the charge right now, but they're being stripped of these rights in just incredible ways. You also covered your last movie was about interstate crosscheck, which was designed to do essentially the same thing over many states. And I wonder if you could explain that to people, but also if you want to give an update on interstate crosscheck as well.
Well, okay. The bad then, the bad, then the good news, which is the bad news is that Brian Kemp of Georgia, working in coordination with a guy named Chris Kobach of Kansas, can't remember that name, just think KKK. Chris Kobach of Kansas, who's now was elected Attorney General again of that state. They came up with a scheme called interstate crosscheck, where they're cross-checking to remove voters who are voting or registered in 2 states. Now, if you vote in 2 states, by the way, it is a crime, Lee. So if if Lee Camp is voting, if you're voting in Texas and you're voting in Florida, you're committing a felony crime. So they found a few felons. 7.2 million voters were voting twice, or I guess you should call 3.6 million voting twice. This massive voting crime wave. And you know what was interesting, Lee, as you'll see in the film too, in Georgia alone, they found one guy named James Brown voting 538 times. Now, I can't make this up. This guy, James Brown, is a serial felon multiple voter. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hey, isn't James Brown kind of a common name for black people? Yes, but it's not a common name for Republicans. So you got to remember. So I'm laughing, but they removed hundreds of thousands of people in 30 states. And I have to say, after we did the movie and after I did my expose for Rolling Stone, and we got a bunch of lawyers and activists involved in it, and Chris Kobach lost his election in Kansas, and his successor immediately killed the entire program. So interstate crosscheck is dead and gone. But we have... I want to give you even more credit. Trump tried to create a new position, basically the voter theft czar, and basically they had to get rid of it in a span of a few weeks because everybody was like, wait, you want us to just allow Chris Kobach, and he appointed Chris Kobach to the post. That's right. You want us to take our state and let Chris Kobach knock everybody off the polls, off the roll? Yeah, so what happened is that he did appoint Mr. KKK, Chris Kobach of Kansas, and as the vote fraud czar, we're going to hunt down all the fraudulent voters. And so he was, and the problem was he was trying to do this all in secret, and he doesn't realize that in our democracy we have something called open government. So he's trying to run this like a CIA operation. So yes, so
sometimes we have open government.
yeah. Well, that's the headline. That's what it says on the package. When you open it up, who knows? Well, that's the whole point. That's what I've been doing. I've been going back to Georgia for 9 years. Why? I mean, from when I lived in London, New York, now LA, and I'm heading right back to the airport now. Because Georgia is the kind of test kitchen for the Jim Crow recipes. And that's why I keep coming back to Georgia. So now they've got this new thing in SB 202, which was signed by this guy, Brian Kemp. Again, the only reason he's governor is that he removed Stacey Abrams' voters. And by the way, she cited my work and complained about it, which of course upset the Democratic Party. You heard Joe Biden say, don't vote for anyone who won't accept the results of an election, knowing that Stacey Abrams was on the ballot in a few days.
What do you think about the Democratic Party writ large, and how, for the most part, they ignore your work, and then occasionally they're straight up hostile to it?
Well, I don't think about the Democratic Party. I mean, again, I'm a journalist, and I work with all these voting rights groups like Black. In fact, by the way, if anyone's in Georgia, in Gwinnett County, I'm going to be showing the film free 3 times. On Wednesday, and then we're going out to Valdosta and other the townships in Georgia, showing the film in churches with Black Voters Matter Fund, the NAACP of Georgia, and the other groups. And so I'm not. These are not the Democratic Party isn't involved in any of these things. New Georgia Project. It's these voting rights groups that are bringing people out. Now, the Democrats, of course, don't mind because they collect the votes, but they're not on the front lines there. And so I've had plenty of problems with Democrats. Now, it's true that the Republicans are they're the real virtuosos at the vote crushing game, but it's not like the Democrats don't do it. So it's very hard to point a finger if it's dirty itself.
Well, yeah, I think the difference is, generally speaking, and this is not a debatable fact, that the Democrats benefit right now in the dynamics of our country when more people vote. That's the way it works right now. It could change in the future, but that's the way it works right now. So Republicans are doing everything they can to suppress the vote or vote thievery in the general. But the Democrats have been involved in their own shit with the primaries, which is why you ended up with that, the New York Board of Elections and pleading guilty in court to purging over 100,000 likely Bernie voters and stuff like that. So it's quite possible the Democratic Party, the larger machine, doesn't want to talk about your work because it just opens a whole can of worms maybe they don't want to address. I don't know.
Well, I have to tell you that if you go to gregpalast.com and type in Bernie, you'll see the article I wrote. I did an investigation for The Guardian about the primary in California. And I did get a mention in the mainstream press. I got ripped up by the New York Times and who made up quotes about things I never ever said. But that's the Times. So
they're good at that. They have quite an imagination.
They must have had a great source because they talked about what I said, but they actually never once talked to me. But that's okay. So what happened in California is that in California you have to have this system where supposedly if you're not registered as a Democrat, and most people in California are registered as independents, but they vote in the Democratic primaries. So, people were told you don't have to register as a Democrat to vote for Sanders, except what people didn't know is that when you walk in to get a ballot, the Secretary of State, now our Senator, Mr. Padilla, ordered poll workers to not hand out Democratic any ballot that would allow people to vote for Bernie Sanders unless they use the magic words. You could not ask for a Democratic Party ballot. They would tell you no, unless you guessed that you're supposed to ask for a crossover Democratic Party ballot.
Right.
It's like, remember when you're a kid saying, "Mother, may I?" This knocked out hundreds of thousands of voters, according to the number one voting expert in California from the California poll. He said basically it's purged by postcard, because the other thing that they do is people in California get their ballots mailed to them. That's a wonderful system. You just get your ballots mailed to you. That's Oregon, Washington, Colorado, California. In other words, American, but outside of America, they don't do that. But they send people ballots. But if they're not registered as Democrats, people open their ballot and say, wait, where's Bernie Sanders? Well, it's not on your ballot. You have to mail back your ballots and sign this affidavit that you really want a crossover Democratic Party ballot. I can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
And so people they can't figure it out. They don't know how to get the ballot. It's a wonderful gimmick, but it means that the Democratic machine never loses because people, if you're part of the machine, you're registered as a Democrat. If you're an independent, you're not in the machine. And so they just make sure that independent vote never happens.
Right.
We look at several 100,000 votes were lost to Bernie. He won in 16 and in 20 he could have won 2, but he did win in 20, but he would have won bigger. But so the Democrats basically go after Democrats. Republicans go after Democrats, but mostly they all go after people of color. In California, they were really aiming at the Hispanic vote that was voting for T.O. Bernie. So, that's the problem, is that both parties go after the most vulnerable voters of color, young voters.
So going back to Georgia, talk about what you found, and it's covered in the film with Brian Kemp and how he got elected in the first place, and I love the details on his fake history.
Oh, yes. Well, okay. So a couple of things. Number one of the things I found in the film, the reason it's called Vigilante, Georgia's vote suppression hitman, Vigilante. And by the way, again, you can see it for free at vigilantemovie.com until the runoff's over. Jamie Foxx subsidized that free showing. So it's vigilantemovie.com. But it's called Vigilante because one of the things in this new bill signed by Governor Kemp, to make sure he stayed Governor Kemp, because he just ran against and beat Stacey Abrams, is that he created something where you can have vigilante vote hunters at any voter in Georgia can challenge the right to vote of any other voter in Georgia, but not just any other voter. The new law says you can have an unlimited number of challenges. And Lee, when I say unlimited, I mean unlimited. We had one woman, you'll see in the film. You saw the film. You enjoyed the film. I understand. There's a woman in red, and you saw her at the beginning of the trailer screaming, "Get out of my house!" And called me what I can't say over the air. In fact, she kept going on. She was this woman dressed like Nancy Reagan, with the high heels, the fancy red dress. She was swearing like a sailor. She was using words that would have gotten me an X rating, so I had to take it out. Her husband tried to jump on me, by the way. I don't think he thought I was cute. I think he was, I don't know what he was doing. And they had guns. You'll see in the film, they had stacks of ammo all over the place. They had guns, and next to the door, an automatic, a Russian automatic rifle.
So not a friendly
and she threw
interview.
me out. So what happened was she had challenged 32,000 voters in Cobb County, in the suburb of Georgia, of Atlanta. This one woman, 32,000 voters she challenged. Now understand, there are 88 of these vigilantes, and I'm not being partisan by saying every single one is a Republican operative. 88 vigilantes. Altogether, they challenged 149,000 voters. 149,000 voters this year. These vigilantes, so they submit these lists. She said it was too expensive for her to even even print out the names of the people that she was attacking, that she was Jim Crowing. So she handed in a thumb drive. I show her the pictures of people whose vote she challenged, but she didn't know. I just said, "Do you know this woman?" No. Ever spoke to her? No. Been to her house? No. Know where she lives? No. Well, you challenged her right to vote. Oh. And then I kept showing her and telling her people, by the way, I didn't show the film. I even got one of the people that she knocked off the vote on the phone. Anyway, so she starts screaming at me, "Get out of my house." And she was really.
And just so people understand what we're talking about, when she or anyone challenges someone else's right to vote, so she hands a thumb drive with 40,000 people on it, those people are then told they have no right to vote unless they show up at a courthouse and explain that they are themselves, which of course most voters are not going to have the time or the wherewithal to do all of that.
And I have to say that about half of it looks like about half of the people that they challenged were absentee voters. So, for example, we had one of the stars of our film is Major Gamaliel Turner. He was challenged because the Republican chairman in Columbus, Georgia, said he didn't live where he lived near Fort Benning. Well, all these soldiers, African-American soldiers, were challenged because they were assigned to other military bases. This guy who is, by the way, career military, Major Turner. He's the he's the Pentagon's special advisor on warfare of the future. Fancy title, huh? Anyway, so he was assigned to California. They wouldn't let him vote. And so the guy who challenged him, this vigilante vote challenger, he challenged 4,000 people around Fort Benning, basically black soldiers, including the major. And this vigilante actually dresses up. You'll see in the film, he dresses up like a vigilante. He thinks he's Doc Holliday. Or I say, this is kind of a shtick that he does. He likes to dress up and tell stories about Doc Holliday, who he says, oh, he killed 3-4 African boys in cold blood. They were, when he says boys, by the way, I looked it up. These were Union soldiers after the Civil War that he gunned down in cold blood. So this is his hero. And he dresses up. You'll see him with his 6 gun and his cowboy hat and his boots and his fly open, by the way, if you notice that. And he's talking about the Doc Holliday, the great vigilante, and then justifying the fact that he challenged 4,000 voters. And I said, do you know what house you're in? Because he was doing his little shtick in this very nice house in Columbus. And he said, no. I said, well, meet your host. And the major walks out. This African-American military officer walks out. I said, this is Major Gamaliel Turner. By the way, you said he doesn't live in this house, in his house, and you challenged his right to vote. And I said, do you want to apologize? Because that's all the major said. I just want the guy to apologize. No. But the thing is, that guy challenged 4,000 people he never met. She challenged 32,000 people. So you meet these people. And also, don't forget, it's not a small thing that they all have guns. You'll see all throughout the film, Vigilante, that the open carry in Georgia, as Major Turner said, look, these they can't wear white sheets anymore. That's considered pretty déclassé. So they dress up as Confederate soldiers. They dress up as Doc Holliday, but they always have an excuse to have a gun on them. And he was not happy that this guy came in with, by the way, that was a loaded 6-gun in that house. And that guy was, so he wasn't exactly Quick Draw McGraw there. He wasn't Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, because he's trying to take about half,
There is a great part of it where he goes to show you the gun and he tries to get it out of the holster and he can't.
But we were worried that the gun would go off or that he would be in a bad mood because when he realized he'd been had, that he has a loaded gun. So it was, but anyway, so there's a lot of humor in it, but it's really dark, so we just, what can I do? I don't want people to be crying through the whole film. You will laugh, I promise you. You will cry. And by the way, if you don't laugh and cry at this film, I'll pay for your therapy.
But this guy Brian Kemp is current governor of Georgia, is such a comic book villain. I mean, he claimed he would grow up poor in a log cabin, but you reveal that it was a gift from his millionaire father. You also reveal that he's the descendant of the first governor of Georgia to import slaves, and it's incredible that these type of human beings are still allowed any kind of power.
Well, the thing is, look, Brian Kemp didn't bring people in chains from Africa, but his ancestors did. He is, because who's this guy Kemp? He says, "Oh, I'm a self-made man." He shows this little, literally a little log cabin in the woods that he lived in, which is, like you say, it's his father-in-law, this multimillionaire superpower in the state. The other thing is that his family, were the real backers and people who schemed up and created the system of school segregation in Georgia. But his first ancestors, he's related to the first governor, like you say, the first governor of Georgia to bring in enslaved Africans. Now, you have to understand, Georgia, most people didn't realize, in fact, until I did the film, I didn't realize that Georgia was one of the only places in America where slavery was illegal in Georgia. And by the way, Georgia meant it was all the South. It was Mississippi, Alabama, parts of Louisiana, parts of Florida. So Georgia was, for this Georgia territory, prohibited slavery because these were like German Swiss landholders they knew that if you had plantations with enslaved workers working for nothing, that they would be reduced to enslavement and poverty. And that's exactly what happened. And as we continue even after the Civil War, you end up with the sharecropping system. That wasn't just black people. It was poor white people too. So this is where Brian Kemp's family made its money, from these Africans who they beat. And by the way, they were internationally notorious for the cruelty of how they treated the Africans. And there was in fact, a big international bestseller written about Kemp's ancestors, about his great cruelty. It was a big international hit. Like, this is what Americans do. And now the thing is, he's not responsible directly, but what he is responsible for is covering up that history. I spoke with his cousin who said, "Look, this is where our money came from. Why are we hiding this? We have to accept that this is where our money and power comes from." His old colleague, Congressman John Barrow, said, "I know where my family's money came from. We held people captive and we tortured them. And that's how our family made money. I know Brian's family, same thing." And why? And instead, he passed one of these so-called anti-CRT laws. He said he prohibits by law. I don't know what they're going to do. Start arresting teachers by law. You can't tell any Georgia school child divisive historical concepts. Well, what is a divisive historical concepts? And I didn't know that history sometimes has a lot of divisive concepts, but it's called history for, it's just the facts. But he says it's illegal. Basically, everyone knows what he's talking about. It's illegal to talk about enslavement in Georgia. And certainly you're going to lose your job if you're a teacher if you start talking about Brian Kemp's, that the Kemp family brought Africans in chains to Georgia. And that's what that's all about. It's about historical amnesia and enforcing it by law.
Well, I have good news. 2 days ago, they created a federal political action committee for Brian Kemp. Very, very possibly planning a run for president. So.
Oh, you bet. I got to tell you. So the Wall Street Journal has already endorsed Kemp for president over Trump or DeSantis. They already have. They said, this is our man already. And so, when you say, and he's supposed to be the rational one, you should see his in our film Vigilante. We actually have some of bits of his commercials where he does this goober thing. He says, I got me this pickup truck so I can round up illegal aliens myself. Yeah, I just said that. It's like, I can't make this up. And he talks in this new goober accent that he kind of made up. And then he has a shotgun. No one's going to touch my gun. It's like, it's cartoonish. But
I know.
Unfortunately, he is the governor. And the only way that this cartoon survives is by stopping people of color from voting. And whether it's his armed vigilantes, literally removing the drop boxes in black counties and sending them to white counties. And that's just the beginning. And, like I say, 98 pages of junk. Even mailing in an absentee ballot for the first time, you have to include some type of ID or ID numbers. One more impediment. Yet they found no one cast an illegal ballot. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation went through every drop box mail-in ballot. Everyone matched signatures. And by the way, you think, oh, this is a Georgia ballot, same as a California ballot. I'm holding it up because I want you to notice something. You can't just photocopy and steal ballots or stick them in drop boxes because every ballot has its own barcode, its own QR code. I'm sorry, your ballot is not secret. Everyone has their own barcode, QR code, and they have to match your signature.
I know the right wing, as you show in your movie, they've created their own movie and stuff like that, saying, "Oh, here's video footage of a guy putting a bunch of ballots into a box at night or whatever." And you rightly point out that many people deliver their whole family's ballots at one time, so you could have 10 ballots, and it's completely legal to put all of your family's ballots into the box at the same time. But beyond just that, even if somebody tried to do this, printed out 10 fake ballots, there are ways of making sure these are real ballots like you're talking about. So
yeah, well, here's the thing. Okay, there was this film, and we have to, one of the things that happened, I just told you about how they slashed black voting, mail-in balloting, by removing the drop boxes. Why they removed the drop boxes? Because of a film called 2000 Mules, which was released. You'll see in my film, I have hunks of it in my own film. It was released by Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. It's been incredibly effective, saying that black men are paid $10. I can't make this up. Black men are paid $10 each by Soros and Zuckerberg which they give this money to Stacey Abrams. I can't make up the story. Stacey Abrams, who then gives black men $10 a piece to steal absentee ballots and fill them out, stuff them in a mailbox. Now, and here's what's interesting about that, Lee. One is Mark Zuckerberg's a Republican. So why is he giving money to steal votes for Democrats? But okay, forget all that. And every drop box has a security camera over it. So Stacey Abrams, who graduated from Yale Law School, is supposedly so dumb as to pay these guys $10 a ballot to stuff them in a ballot box, commit a felony crime under a security camera, when all she has to do is put a 59-cent stamp on the outside of the envelope and mail it and stick 700 in a mailbox at a time. So while you could say it's ridiculous, and by the way, one of the people that they said one man, you'll see him in our film. You see some young black male, what looks like a young black male, sticking a couple ballots in the drop box and getting in his car and leaving. They say, there he is, O.J. Simpson leaving the scene of a crime. And I asked in the film, Latasha Brown, did you see O.J. Simpson leaving the scene of crime? She says, I saw a black man voting. By the way, we were able to, he doesn't want his name used. We were able to find the black man who was committing this supposed felony crime on a security camera. He is a major executive for a big tech company, and he is suing Donald Trump's cronies for
Nice.
calling him O.J. Simpson leaving the scene of a crime when he's an American casting his ballot. And that's all there is to it. So these guys, so they made this up. Why am I going after this? Why do I care about this stupid film? Because they all over the nation, they're removing ballot drop boxes to make it harder for people who work a couple jobs or take care of other people to vote.
Yeah, and
that's the point.
And again, you know, some people may have tuned in late. Even if you are an independent, which there are more independents in this country right now than there are Democrats or Republicans individually, even if you're an independent, you should care about this, because no third party is ever going to have a chance if all the people of color are purged from these voter rolls and people don't have legit elections. So if you're more into, you know, third parties or things like that, that you should still care. But
well, none of us stand if we lose the right to vote in America, and it is slipping away. We all lose. None of us stand a chance. There's no sense. You can't talk about doing something about global warming, women's reproductive rights, any of that, unless you actually have the right to vote for those views which most Americans believe in. But they're not going to. They don't trust you. They don't trust you, America, to vote. That's why they're taking it away. Yeah,
well, that's the great risk to them, is true democracy. People actually having their voice heard is the great risk to the ruling class. But so I want to circle back to why you aren't, and you used to do more reporting for BBC and Rolling Stone and Guardian, and so why is this not being covered more?
Because now the Democrats have gone on a crusade against what they call election deniers. And the Republicans and the Democrats have basically swallowed their line, saying anyone, in fact, the rule at Facebook, YouTube has been, you cannot question the validity of a prior election. Well, wait a minute. As Stacey Abrams, who did question the validity of Brian Kemp's election as governor of Georgia, she said the difference between Donald Trump denying an election and my questioning the election outcome is that I've got the facts. He's got the fantasy. I've got the facts, but you can't discuss it anymore. It's impossible. And so, so you end up with stations like MSDNC who do not want to talk. They'll use that polite term vote suppression before an election, but it never apparently ever, despite all this vote suppression, never affects an election. I don't get how that happens. How do you have vote suppression? So Joe Biden said, he actually went down to Georgia and said, Georgia's new voting law is Jim Crow 2.0. Now, okay, did Jim Crow 2.0 affect this election? Oh, no. Don't vote for anyone who says, no. We don't allow. Yes, there's all these laws that block people of color from voting, but it doesn't really matter. And that's why he said, don't forget, he said, when he was asked when he first took office, are you going to push for the what was it, House Bill 1, which would have provided more voting protection? He says, well, if I go for that, I won't be able, if I go for voting rights, I won't be able to pass my foreign policy or economic program. So he put it way down there. The problem is, Joe, if you lose this Senate, and by the way, 50-50 is a virtual loss, because you'd have to call, because it's not like he has control of Manchin and Sinema. Then you ain't getting your domestic program. You ain't getting your foreign policy program. There is no question that if you didn't have these Jim Crow policies all over America, that those few congressional seats that put Mr. McCarthy in as speaker would not have happened. We have to face the fact that we still are dealing with the right of still asking the same question, more than half a century after crossing the bridge at Selma, more than a century and a half since the 15th Amendment in the Civil War. Can black people vote?
Someone in the comment section asked if you could comment on gerrymandering also being a huge problem.
Well, yeah, and they go together, because what happens is that if you suppress the vote, you elect you elect an undemocratic legislature, and then they will draw the lines where the point of gerrymandering is that you have politicians picking their voters instead of the voters picking the politicians. And I don't know if that counts as democracy. So yes, that's a huge problem, because if you look at the number of actual votes, Democrats way outvote Republicans, or way out register Republicans. The problem is that you have this gerrymandering system where state legislatures crack and stack districts. In other words, they'll take all black people and they'll dump them all in one little district for a state legislature, and then they'll crack apart Democratic strongholds and smash them up and send them across 5 districts. That's how gerrymandering is done, stacking and cracking. It's pretty simple stuff, but it's not democracy.
I also wanted to get your take, since it just happened today, and it's your colleagues, the journalists, if they can be called that, at the mainstream media, the New York Times, the Washington Post. It only took them 10 years, but just today, and several other outlets joined together to call for dropping the charges against WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange. These outlets are 10 years late, but you're one of the best investigative journalists I know. So if you can comment on that and what it would mean to have investigative journalism all of a sudden become a crime worth 175 years in prison.
Yeah, I mean, look, it doesn't matter whether you like Julian Assange, dislike him. That's not part of it, whether you agree with what he did or didn't do. He is a journalist. He ran a news service, WikiLeaks, which is vital. And I was working with The Guardian, and understand how valuable this stuff is to us as Americans. Okay, his service, for example, when he released the WikiLeaks documents, one thing that happened is that I found out the real cause of the Deepwater Horizon blowout, because within the WikiLeaks documents, it said that 17 months before the Deepwater Horizon blew in the Gulf, that you had an identical blowout in the Caspian Sea, also British Petroleum, also Transocean deepwater drilling, because they used a method that caused another in the Caspian Sea, caused a similar blowout like you had with the Deepwater Horizon. Why am I telling you this story? We only know it was hidden and covered up by the Bush administration, by Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. And he released her cables, which, of course, Chelsea Manning had provided to him. He was the source. But Julian was the journalist, the news service that got it out. And what made me sick is to see guys like Christoph of the New York Times and other writers who are using Julian Assange's material to get awards and prizes for their wonderful journalism, while Julian, their conduit for the news, is in prison. And Christoph said, "Oh, his problem was that he thought the sentence, like for example, the sentence for Chelsea Manning was too long." Too long? Your source? I'm sorry. I just want to assure people, if you come to me with inside material, I will go to jail rather than give you up. I got to tell you that right now. And I cannot believe that the New York Times actually originally said, "Oh, well, don't send him to jail for his entire life. That's a little bit much. He's our source, 10 years. I don't know what they were going to suggest." It was amazing. So I'm glad finally that you have some journalists realizing, why it's selfish. They realize, wait a minute. If Assange go to prison, I could go to prison. Exactly.
Yeah, it amazes me that all of these mainstream outlets that have been so spineless and so lacking in any amount of courage to stand up for Assange don't realize that it sets an incredible precedent for them themselves to have their lives destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems is, again, they want to use these sources, but they want to be part of the club too. They don't want to be excluded. See, because there's this desire to have access. And I remember in Britain that was something that when I was working at BBC, we didn't care about, which is that if a politician won't talk to you, then you see me a lot if you go to gregpalast.com and see my old BBC stuff or Democracy Now! Material or now in my films, you see that if someone won't talk to me, I go hunt them down. Like I hunted down Brian Kemp. I actually followed his campaign bus, because he wouldn't say where he's going, to a pig roast And that's when I was asked, you'll see in the film when I asked him if he was removing black people from the voter rolls just so he could win the election. And he had me arrested, by the way.
Did he? Why didn't you show that?
Well, it was goofy. It was kind of a catch and release. It was so comical. So they grabbed me. So the police, and because what Kemp had told the police was that I was trespassing. Because in America, you can ask, believe it or not, journalists are allowed to ask the governor a question. And so he said the owner said I was trespassing on the barbecue joint's property, and the barbecue joint owner said, "Are you kidding? I thought that was great. Finally, someone's asking that governor a question." And so they had to kind of let me go. But so the thing is, this idea, and then by the way, I was viciously attacked in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for asking that question. And they said, that Greg Palast has been known to report for a extreme left-wing network called Pacifica. For those who listen to KPFK or KPFA or whatever, or listen to the Democracy Now. So my fellow reporters, instead of saying, I don't think you should be arresting reporters for asking questions, literally went after me. Like I was a troublemaker. And that happened to me in Georgia in 2006 too. Now, but the thing is, I'm a lucky guy. What happens to me, I get arrested, I get pushed around, I get literally physically attacked, that type of thing, minor stuff. My reporter that works with me, our cameraman, Zach D. Roberts, often gets his head whacked and smashed in. I can't tell you how many times there's been big lumps in his head and our cameras smashed by ultra right-wing freaks, some of whom are wearing police uniforms, by the way. And so, this type of, I remember during the Occupy Wall Street, when we had a cop, literally, we have a picture of the Billy Club going through Zach's camera lens. The shutter went off just as the Billy Club is smashing through the lens. Thanks a lot. And the New York Times finally was upset because they arrested a New York Times reporter, but they wouldn't talk about our reporting or anything or anyone else. So, forgetting that the reason you got arrested, the Times reporters are arrested, is because they thought, well, you're not going to say anything because you didn't say anything when they beat up and they, for a short time, they even arrested Zach at Occupy Wall Street for he had all his badges, etc.
Just having a camera on them. Yeah, they don't like that. A minute ago, you mentioned the revelations about the Deepwater Horizon and the testing of the oil platform, right?
Yeah. So what happened? What happened? Yeah, it blew up and it was covered up, and that's why WikiLeaks gave us that information. Right.
I wanted to tell you, and I don't know whether someone's told you this before. I hope they have, but so Aaron Sorkin put out that series Newsroom that was kind of the liberal fantasy of a newsroom if they actually cared and if they actually dug down. And I believe it's the first episode. They suddenly decide to do the real news, and it's during the Deepwater Horizon spill, the BP spill. And in one day, they get to the bottom of the fact that the concrete was never tested accurately, and they reveal it on it's equivalent to NBC Nightly News. And it's this big gripping, they did it, they got to the bottom of it. And I'm like, the only person I've ever heard cover that is Greg Palast. To this day, NBC has not covered the reality of the Deepwater.
That Dan Rather, after he was bounced from CBS when he had a show on another network for a while, and his producer called me up and said, "Oh my God, this amazing story that was in BBC that was on you did on what they call Channel 4 Television Britain, which is the other government station." And so we did this amazing. He says, "Your story is amazing. I can't believe it hasn't been played in the U.S. about how the State Department knew before the Deepwater Horizon blew out that there'd been an identical blowout in the Caspian Sea with Chevron oil." Now, by the way, let's remember, Chevron covered this up. And who was the Secretary of State? Oh, the SS Chevron, Condoleezza Rice, who had been on the board of Chevron. So so this was not covered. And this guy was shocked. He said, "Oh, Dan will love this story." I said, "Dan won't love this story." Dan won't love this story. He already lost one job. I said, "Believe me, you're not going to run this story." Guy never called me back. He said, "Oh no, Dan will love this." And by the way, that was the other thing, is that when I first did. Now you talk about when I first did vote suppression issues. I was at the Guardian and at BBC at the same time. I worked both TV and print, and I was living in London and watching black people come in front of the TV cameras in Florida. This is the Bush-Gore race in 2000, saying, I wasn't able to vote. And so I look into this, and I contacted, and I working with another journalist, Sasha Abramovitz, and found out that they had removed about 58,000 people from the voter rolls before the election. And I looked, and and I got the lists from out of Catherine Harris's office. She was the Secretary of State. It was almost all black people. And I didn't have to guess, by the way, because it says on your registration in Florida, black, white, black, white, black, 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 whatever. And this whole list was,
because that's really needed on a voter registration, what your race is.
Yeah. So they knew exactly that they were removing all these black people. Well, if they're felons, they're felons. They can't, at the time in Florida, if you had a felony, conviction, you couldn't vote. Except I looked it up. And there was a guy, Willie Steen. He was working at a hospital. Wait, you can't work at a hospital in Florida if you have a felony conviction. He says I went to Willie Steen and said, yeah, they told me I was a felon. I couldn't vote. I had my 5-year-old son with me. I've never even had a parking ticket. I've never had a parking ticket, let alone being a felon. They had mixed his name, Willie Steen, with the name of a white guy in Ohio named Willie Osteen, different race, different age, but they found a black guy with a similar name, so they removed him. 58,000 black men removed, and yet George Bush was named president by winning Florida by 537 votes, not counting those black people. Why am I bringing up this story? Because that worked, and so they expanded that whole felon purge business nationwide. And in addition, though, Dan Rather was going to cover that story too. Remember, I told you I did it in The Guardian and I did it for the BBC. Dan Rather was going to run that story. And I said, what happened? How come you didn't run the story? After 7 days, I said, look, I'm giving you one of my best stories. It's the base of the best democracy money can buy. And he said, oh, well, your story didn't stand up. I said, wow, I was wrong? Tell me why. How do you know I was wrong? He says, well, we called Governor Bush's office, and he said it wasn't true. Oh, you know what? I said, I didn't think of that. Oh, my God. Why didn't I just call Bush and say, did you remove 58,000 black people from the voter rolls on purpose to elect your brother, Jeb Bush, as governor? Right. And I don't know why I didn't think of that. Lee, these guys are really good journalists, and I just think that you're being sarcastic and casting dispersions on these guys who really know how you do investigative reporting. And I can tell you one thing, Mr. Sorkin, you've never been in a goddamn newsroom, and that's pretty damn clear. Because the minute someone says we're going to do an original investigation, they're going to say our lawyers won't allow it, we can't afford it, and go find another job. That's American news.
Last question, and then we'll wrap up. Speaking of the same thing, stories that should have been covered and weren't. One of my favorite that you've done is the revelations that there was at least a couple of people who knew that basically Hurricane Katrina, before it was Hurricane Katrina, would destroy, something like Hurricane Katrina would destroy New Orleans, cause epic flooding. And they were raising the alarm, running around saying, look, you've cut a path through the mangrove forest straight to New Orleans, and one day this will cause catastrophic flooding, and the Bush administration and everyone else ignored it.
I got to tell you this very quickly, that Professor Von Heerden of Louisiana State University, he was an anti-apartheid fighter in South Africa. No one was going to scare him. And he said, look, the oil companies have created this dangerous path because of their dredging, basically a hurricane highway. And he said, okay, are you ready for this? I can't make this up. 30 days before the flood that destroyed New Orleans, he said 30 days before that on my one of my TV outlets, Channel 4 Britain, he said in 30 days this city could be underwater. And 30 days later, it was underwater. And he called the White House before the flood and said, this thing is going to, we don't have the the levees are not high enough. They're constructed wrong. You've got this hurricane highway. You got to plug it. We can't have we can't have these oil tankers running straight between the Mississippi and New Orleans. The city will be underwater with any storm surge at all. Remember, Katrina never actually hit the city of New Orleans. I try to report that. They fired Professor Von Heerden from LSU.
Really?
And by the way, he won a academic court case saying he was removed because of pressure from Chevron Corporation. Oh, those guys again.
Wow.
He was removed by pressure from Chevron Corporation. None of this was covered except in Britain. I have a film, Bush Family Fortunes. I have, my book, Our Madhouse, and my book, Vulture's Picnic, cover what happened in New Orleans, but I could not get this in the U.S. press for anything.
So I know you got to run. Thank you so much, Greg. It's the movie is at you can get it at gregpalast.com/vigilante-film, and it's free until December 6th, so for another week. Yep. And it's excellent. Any other places you want to tell people to follow your work?
Okay, just go to gregpalast.com, and if you're going to be in Georgia, go to gregpalast.com and find out where we're having not only the free showing with tacos as part of Get Out the Vote actions for the activists. Otherwise, just get the movie for free at vigilantemovie.com. By the way, we are not releasing this film commercially. You can't get it anywhere else. It's the only way to get it right now, just to inform people before this election. So vigilantemovie.com.
Thanks so much, Greg. Keep at it.
You got it, sir.
Later. Thank you all so much for joining me. The only way this show keeps going and is supported, it's completely independent. It's you can support it at patreon.com/behind the headlines. I do 2 interviews a week. So far, I've already had interviews with Scott Ritter, Chris Hedges, Stephen Donziger, Alan McLeod, and tomorrow is another great journalist, Ann Garrison. So I hope you will join me again tomorrow at youtube.com/behind the headlines. And a new episode of Most Censored News is coming out. So please check all of that out and support this show. If you want to see this keep going, if you want to see the interview series keep going, please become a member, or at the very least, subscribe to the YouTube page and support us that way. All right. I will see you tomorrow. Keep fighting.